Hi, class. Thanks for taking a look at this Module 5 commentary that I'm going to give. Um, it's kind of important just to kind of outline some of the main points, the takeaways. This is not rocket science, so these points are important, but in some ways kind of easy to grasp once you get them. Although I would argue against what Zach brought up at the end of the thread there, that it's common sense, and I'll take a look at that here in a second. But what I want to do first is go over some of these main points about negative phrasing, which is probably one of the most important aspects of a business writing course, is how to impart bad news in a way that uh, maintains goodwill and avoids negativity. So let me kind of address that first, give you some examples, and then kind of cover some of the comments as they played out on the Module 5 thread. So what is negative phrasing? Negative phrasing is simply avoiding any words that are directly negative, like no, or not, or unfortunately, or we regret, or etc. Um, the caveat is sometimes maybe these things are not they're avoidable. Um, you may have to use those phrases sometimes, but generally in business writing, it's considered bad practice, and so there are a lot of kind of tricks to avoid those kinds of words. And the main trick is to state things in the positive. What does that mean? For example, here's just, if we were in class together, I would just write this sentence on the board. Unfortunately, we regret to inform you we will not be pursuing your candidacy further. Okay, so that's kind of the standard negative phrase, right? State that in the positive. How can you state that in a way which avoids, unfortunately, regret, we will not, those words, right? And if you think about it long enough, you can get around it. You can say, we are writing to inform you we are pursuing other candidates further. Thanks for applying, right? So, is that rocket science? No. Um, it's not something we're used to doing. And I'll bring up an example of my 2-year-old daughter, right? Um, what does she get? What is that? One of the first words that she picks up? No, no, right? She's going to say no. It's more direct. It's easier, and it's a way to kind of get your point across in a very succinct way, right? Business writing is more indirect, and if there's any criticism that I would have as a communicator, it would be that sometimes I feel like I'm dancing around the topic, right? And that's normal, but that's the way it is. I didn't make it up. So so avoid negative phrasing. State things in the positive. That's kind of the big point here. The second kind of big point that I'd want you guys to think about as you move forward is when you do state the bad news in a positive way, even that needs to be sandwiched in between a buffer and a conclusion that maintains goodwill. So, a standard business letter, negative newsletter, would look something like an introduction, a buffer, bad news, explanation, conclusion. And so the bad news actually is right in the middle of that bad news sandwich, okay? You don't lead with it, you don't finish with it. You want to enter into and leave the communication maintaining goodwill. Okay, so enough said on that. I want to kind of go through some good points that you all brought up. I'm just going to kind of go from top to bottom, or from bottom to top rather. Andrew mentioned a really great point from one of the articles about focusing on solutions instead of blame. Okay, again, reinforcing positive versus negative phrasing, or even positive approach versus negative approach, and that as you get older, you do learn your boss isn't going to want you to come into a meeting and be really negative and state state all these things that can't be done, right? He's not interested in that. He or she is not interested in that. They are interested in hearing what can be done. How are we going to fix this? Sure, there's a problem. What are we going to do about it? So focusing on solutions instead of blaming other people is just a great practice. And plus, if you're looking to blame other people, that's not great for collaboration, right? Mark Miller mentioned, in a similar vein, state what can be done, not what can't be done. You noticing a theme here, right? Rebecca mentioned as far as correspondence, rereading before hitting send, and I think we've mentioned this before in other threads, but especially if you're an emotional person, if you're human, you're emotional, right? And you're going to hear something you don't like, and your initial reaction is going to be probably a natural a refutation or a rebuking of that person who's telling you something you don't want to hear, and you're going to want to rifle something off and send it, and it may not be something that, it may be something you regret later, and we all have to do this, believe me. So it's always, I was always taught actually, write that first response first, then put it away for a day, or at least a couple hours, and then go back and reread it and see if, after you've cooled down, if that's really the best way of responding to that bad news, whatever it is. So good advice. And that kind of segues into what Emily had said about emotions. And I think, that's really important. Part of this, really the exigency of positive phrasing, is we are dealing with each other as people. People don't like to be told no. They don't like to be told you did something wrong, right? There are ways to couch those kinds of things in a way to maintain that goodwill. What is goodwill? It's just that I still want to do business with you. However, here's the bad news kind of thing. It's not about burning bridges. It's about kind of maintaining that relationship, even though, people don't see eye to eye. And a good way to do that is to stay positive and to avoid making someone angry needlessly. So Emily's point about emotions hindering what we do is a great point. Staying positive helps collaboration. And there's another great little point there about people forgetting, what you said exactly, but they'll remember the feelings that came out of that correspondence. That's really interesting. Again, we are rational, right? But we're also very emotional. And so you might just remember kind of what came out of that as you felt it rather than what was said. But what was said produces those emotions. So it's not implying that the words aren't important. It's just that we are emotional beings. And so you want to try to maintain a good emotional state in your recipient who you're communicating with. Allison said that, mentioned something about positive phrasing, a point about, no bad news in the subject line. That's great advice, another great takeaway. And I also want to thank Allison for that link about misused words, which is about image damaging mistakes that, even though we're all fallible, right? If you make a silly mistake, which we all do, someone who might not know you might look at you negatively because they think, this person doesn't have a command of their own native language. And I'm not saying that as being judgmental at all, because everyone makes mistakes with language, because we're not perfect, which goes back to what Rebecca said about kind of rereading and proofreading. And that brings us to what Zach said about common sense and kind of feeling, I think, frustrated that a lot of this is very simple, which is true. Although I would contest the word common sense, because I don't think there's anything commonsensical about being indirect. To go back to my example of my 2-year-old, she is not learning how to be indirect first. It seems more common to be more direct in how we speak. And so And so I think, and at least in how I teach this class, I see a lot more instances of, the direct than the indirect. And so we could debate whether being indirect is more or less effective. And like I said, I'm okay with having that discussion, although it seems that the way we communicate now, and we could point to political correctness as being kind of the genesis for this, but people prefer that indirect mode when we're being told bad news. And again, I would say that that's actually more, in a sense, natural. Like when we're being indirect, like, wouldn't you rather if someone's breaking up with you? Wouldn't you rather kind of hear the explanation and kind of be led through that than being told up front? Although I could hear the other argument being, no, I'd rather be told up front. So, again, it's a good debate to have and to think about. And there might be instances where your employer, your boss, whatever, would rather you be more direct. And that would be a case-by-case thing. Human communication is a really messy thing. And so as soon as you establish rules, a lot of times those rules do have a tendency to need to be broken. So anyway, so those are the main points for this week for Module 5. Thanks a lot for your participation, and I'll see you in class. Bye.